There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They were the plain clothes of a Tuesday night, or the quiet hum of a refrigerator, or the familiar weight of a friend sleeping on your couch. You don't recognize them as watersheds at the time. They are simply moments, strung together in a sequence you've come to expect. It's only later, when you trace the map of your own heart, that you find the big, red X marking the spot. For me, that spot was the worn, navy blue fabric of my secondhand sofa, and the specific pressure of Leo's head resting on my shoulder, his breathing a slow, steady tide against the shell of my ear. It was the moment I stopped holding my own breath and started breathing with him. We had a language that existed without words, Leo and I. It was built in the silent spaces, in the long, drawn-out pauses between the boisterous noise of his life and the quiet observation of mine. He was a creature of kinetic energy, a swimmer whose entire being was calibrated for forward motion, for cleaving water and chasing the tenths of a second that separated glory from mere effort. His world was a cacophony of splashes, cheering crowds, and the endless, backslapping camaraderie of the team. Mine was the quiet click of a camera shutter, the chemical scent of the darkroom, and the patient work of waiting for the right light to fall. We were, by any objective measure, a study in contrasts, two different species who had somehow found a common habitat in the sterile, cinder-block landscape of a university dormitory. Our friendship had been forged in the shared misery of freshman year, when we were assigned as roommates by an algorithm that must have had a sense of irony. He arrived with a mountain of duffel bags stenciled with the university logo and a smile that could disarm armies. I arrived with 2 boxes of books and a vintage camera case that held my entire world. For the first few weeks, we orbited each other like cautious planets. My silence a dense gravity he seemed unsure how to approach. His brightness a solar flare I was content to watch from a distance. The treaty was signed one night over a shared, lukewarm pizza, when he confessed his terror of failing a literature class, and I, in a rare moment of unguardedness, admitted I didn't know a single other person on campus. He taught me the names of our teammates, dragging me into the fold with a gentle but insistent pull. I edited his essays, translating his powerful, athletic thoughts into the structured language our professor demanded. A symbiosis was born. By our 3rd year, the orbits had decayed. We were no longer separate celestial bodies, but a binary system, so deeply enmeshed that the line between his space and mine had all but dissolved. Though we now had separate rooms across the hall from each other, the door to my room was perpetually ajar, an unspoken invitation. He would breeze in without knocking, collapsing on my bed to complain about practice or to celebrate a new personal best, leaving a faint, clean scent of chlorine in his wake. He was a vibrant splash of color in my monochrome world, and I was, I think, a point of stillness for him, an anchor in the relentless current of his life. I photographed him, of course. It was unavoidable. He was a photographer's dream, all sharp lines and fluid grace, a body that spoke a language of power and discipline. But the pictures I kept, the ones I never showed anyone, were not the dramatic shots of him slicing through the water. They were the quiet ones. Leo asleep on my floor, cheek pressed against a textbook. Leo staring out the window, his usually bright face clouded with some distant thought. Leo listening, truly listening, as I explained the subtle alchemy of silver halide crystals. In my photographs, I could study him without the risk of being seen. I could map the geography of his face, the slight furrow that appeared between his brows when he was concentrating, the way a genuine smile started in his eyes before it ever reached his mouth. I loved him. It was a truth as solid and fundamental as the ground beneath my feet, and just as silent. I had packed it away in a light-proof box deep inside my chest, a precious, undeveloped negative I was too afraid to expose to the world. A friendship like ours was a rare and delicate ecosystem. My feelings were an invasive species I was terrified would destroy it all. So I became a master of containment, an expert in the art of the unspoken. I learned to live in the space just adjacent to my own desire, close enough to feel its warmth, but never close enough to get burned. He had a girlfriend, anyway. Sarah. She was nice enough, I suppose. Bright and bubbly, a perfect match for the public version of Leo. I was never jealous of her, not really. I was something quieter, something more akin to an anthropologist observing a foreign culture. I watched them together, the easy way they held hands, the public kisses, and it all felt like a performance I was watching from the wings. It didn't feel real in the way that the silence in my room with Leo felt real. That was the space where the truth lived. The shift began, as so many shifts do, with a fracture. It was the conference championships, the biggest meet of the season. Leo was the anchor for the final relay, the one that would decide everything. The entire natatorium was electric, the air thick with the smell of ozone and the roar of the crowd. I was on the deck, my press pass giving me a vantage point most people would kill for, but my camera hung forgotten around my neck. I was just watching him. He dove in with a lead, a sliver of time that should have been a fortress. But the swimmer in the next lane, a rival he'd been battling all season, stayed with him. Stroke for stroke, they churned the water into a white chaos. In the final 10 meters, something in Leo's rhythm faltered. It was imperceptible to most, a tiny hesitation, a fractional shortening of his reach. But I saw it. I had spent 3 years watching him swim, and I knew his rhythm better than my own heartbeat. He touched the wall, and for a moment, the world held its breath. Then the scoreboard flashed. Second place, by 0.03 of a second. A collective groan went through our side of the stands. Leo hauled himself out of the pool, his face a mask of disbelief. He didn't look at his teammates. He didn't look at the coach. His eyes scanned the deck, wild and searching, and for a dizzying second, they locked with mine. In that moment, I saw past the athlete. I saw a boy who had built his entire identity on the foundation of being the best, and that foundation had just cracked. He tore his gaze away, and the mask of the stoic athlete slammed back into place. But I had seen it. The hairline fracture. The beginning of the crumble. The aftershock came 2 days later. He showed up at my open door, a space he usually filled with his boundless energy, but this time he just stood in the frame, a ghost haunting the edges of my room. He looked hollowed out, the usual light in his eyes dimmed to a pilot light. "She broke up with me," he said. The words were flat, devoid of emotion, as if he were reading a weather report. Sarah, of course. She was a fair-weather fan of the Leo legend, not equipped for the reality of his failure. I didn't say, "I'm sorry," or "That's terrible." The platitudes felt cheap and insulting. Instead, I just looked at him, holding his gaze, and pushed my desk chair back from my computer. "Come in, Leo." He drifted into the room and sank onto the edge of my bed, his shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. He looked like a grand, stone statue that had been pushed off its pedestal. He didn't talk about the breakup, not really. He talked about the race. He dissected it, frame by frame, his voice a low monotone. He talked about the water feeling heavy, about his pull feeling weak, about the roar of the crowd fading into a dull buzz. He was performing an autopsy on his own defeat, and I just sat there and let him. I didn't offer advice or encouragement. I just listened, providing the one thing I knew he needed, a silent, unwavering space to fall apart. For the first time, the vibrant, unstoppable force of Leo was utterly still. And in that stillness, something new began to grow. The ritual started that same week. It began not with a request, but with an unspoken need. It was almost 2 a.m. when a soft knock came at my door. Not the usual boisterous bang, but a hesitant tap, so quiet I almost thought I'd imagined it. I opened it to find him standing there in the dim hallway light, wearing a faded t-shirt and sweats. He looked exhausted, his face pale and drawn. "Can't sleep," he mumbled, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere over my shoulder. "Mind if I?" He gestured vaguely toward my couch. It wasn't a question so much as a surrender. "Of course," I said, stepping back to let him in. He didn't say another word. He just crossed the small room, grabbed the extra blanket I kept folded on my armchair, and collapsed onto the sofa. Within minutes, the sound of his deep, even breathing filled the silence. I sat at my desk for over an hour, the glow of my monitor illuminating the pages of a book I wasn't reading. My senses were entirely focused on the other presence in the room. The soft rustle of the blanket, the faint, lingering scent of his soap, the sheer, physical fact of him, vulnerable and asleep, just a few feet away. It felt like holding a fragile, sleeping bird in my hands. I was terrified of making a sound, of moving too quickly, of startling him awake. Eventually, I crept into my own bed, but sleep was a distant country. I lay there in the dark, listening to him breathe, and a strange, protective tenderness washed over me. It was a feeling so potent it almost hurt. 2 nights later, he was back. Same quiet knock. Same mumbled explanation. This time, I had left the blanket out for him. He gave me a small, grateful smile that barely touched his eyes and settled in. This became the new pattern of our nights. He would try to sleep in his own room, a room that I imagined now felt too large, too empty, haunted by the ghosts of victory and a departed girlfriend. He would wrestle with his own thoughts, with the unfamiliar specter of failure, and when the silence became too loud, he would cross the hall. He never asked if it was okay. He just came, and I never questioned it. I just let him in. My room became his sanctuary, a quiet harbor where his restless mind could finally drop anchor. The first escalation of the ritual was subtle. It was a particularly cold night a few weeks into this new arrangement. I was already in bed, reading by the light of a small lamp, when his now familiar knock came. He came in, shivering slightly. The university's ancient heating system was notoriously fickle. He grabbed the blanket and curled up on the couch, but he couldn't seem to get comfortable. He tossed and turned, the soft rasp of the fabric the only sound in the room. After about 20 minutes of this, he sat up. "Julian?" he whispered into the darkness. "Yeah." My voice was rough with disuse. "It's freezing over here." I didn't know what to say to that. I couldn't offer him my bed. That was a line too bright, too bold to even contemplate. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken possibilities. Could I just... He stopped, and I could hear the hesitation, the vulnerability in his voice. Could I just take the blanket and sleep on the floor? By the radiator. My radiator was right next to my bed. It was a small room. The space between my bed and the wall was a narrow channel. For him to sleep, there would mean he was, for all intents and purposes, sleeping beside me. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet room. This was new territory. This was a change in the topography of our arrangement. But the exhaustion and misery in his voice eclipsed my own panic. He wasn't asking for intimacy. He was asking for warmth. "Okay," I managed to say, my throat tight. He moved with a quiet economy, dragging the blanket and the single couch cushion over to the small patch of carpet. He settled down, a long, dark shape in the sliver of moonlight coming through the window. He was so close I could have reached out and touched him. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, a stark contrast to the cold air in the room. I could hear every breath, no longer a distant tide, but a wave breaking right beside me. I turned off my lamp, plunging the room into darkness, but it did nothing to quiet my senses. I was acutely, painfully aware of him. I lay perfectly still, my muscles rigid, convinced that even the slightest movement would betray the frantic, chaotic storm inside me. I was a cartographer, and a whole new continent had just appeared on my map, inches from my own shore. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just lay there, listening to the twin rhythms of his breathing and my own racing heart, until the first gray light of dawn began to creep into the room. The floor became the new couch. He didn't even bother with the pretense of the sofa anymore. He would come in, grab his designated cushion and blanket, and settle into his spot beside my bed. We never spoke of it. It was another unspoken rule in our silent constitution. He needed to be near, and I needed to let him. My bedroom, once my solitary fortress, had become a shared space, a two-person lifeboat. My nights were now a tapestry of his presence. The sound of him sighing in his sleep. The way he would sometimes mutter the names of swimming strokes, his limbs twitching as he relived a race in his dreams. One night, I woke up to find his hand had flopped out from under the blanket, his fingers resting on the floor just inches from my own hand, which was dangling over the side of the mattress. I stared at his hand in the gloom, at the long, strong fingers that could pull him through water with such grace. I felt an almost overwhelming urge to close that small distance, to lace my fingers with his. The desire was so sharp, so physical, it was like a shard of glass in my chest. I pulled my hand back and curled it into a tight fist under my pillow, my nails digging into my palm. I had to maintain the boundary. The boundary was everything. He was seeking comfort, not me. I was just the provider of the space where that comfort could be found. I was the room, not the occupant. I was the harbor, not the home. The transition from the floor to the couch, a different couch, my couch, was the next seismic event. It wasn't in my dorm room, but back at my parents' house over winter break. My family lived only an hour from campus, and since Leo's family was on the other side of the country, I had invited him to spend the week with us. My parents adored him, as everyone did. They were charmed by his easy manners and the way he helped my dad with the gutters without being asked. But I could see the strain beneath his smile, the lingering shadow in his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. My childhood bedroom was small, with only a twin bed. The unspoken arrangement from the dorm didn't apply here. The first night, he took the pull-out sofa in the basement den without a word, and I slept in my own bed, the silence of the house feeling vast and empty without the familiar sound of his breathing nearby. It felt wrong. It felt like a regression, a step back into the formal roles we had abandoned. The second night, we were watching a movie in the den. A blizzard was raging outside, piling snow against the windows and muffling the world in a thick, white silence. My parents had already gone to bed. It was late, the movie was long, and the low light and warmth of the room were hypnotic. I was sitting at one end of the L-shaped sectional, and he was at the other. As the movie wore on, the space between us seemed to shrink. He shifted, stretching his long legs out, his foot brushing against my calf. Neither of us moved. It was a small, incidental touch, the kind that happened all the time between friends. But in the charged quiet of that room, it felt like a declaration. After a few minutes, he shifted again, drawing his legs up but leaning his head back against the cushions, his eyes closing. He wasn't asleep, just resting. I watched the way the soft light from the television flickered across his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw, the gentle curve of his mouth. The yearning in my chest was a physical ache, a dull, constant pressure beneath my ribs. I wanted to reach out, to smooth the worry from his brow, to feel the solid, reassuring weight of him next to me. Then he spoke, his voice soft and thick with sleepiness. My side of the couch is cold. It wasn't a complaint. It was an observation. But it was also an invitation. It was a door left open a crack, waiting to see if I would push it. My heart did a slow, painful lurch. This was it. This was a choice. I could pretend I didn't understand. I could make a joke, tell him to grab another blanket. I could maintain the carefully constructed boundary that kept me safe. Or I could walk through the door. I could choose to believe he was asking for what I thought he was asking for. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, I did nothing. I just sat there, my mind a whirlwind of fear and hope. Fear of misreading everything, of shattering our friendship into a million irreparable pieces. And hope, a terrifying, brilliant hope, that maybe, just maybe, he felt it too. Maybe the comfort he was seeking was not just proximity, but connection. I took a slow breath, and then I moved. I didn't say a word. I just shifted, sliding from my end of the couch to his, closing the distance between us. I settled beside him, my shoulder pressing against his. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. Instead, he let out a long, slow sigh, a sound of profound relief, and tilted his head until it came to rest on my shoulder. And that was it. The world shifted on its axis. The weight of his head was both a tremendous burden and an incredible gift. My entire body went rigid, every nerve ending firing at once. I was suddenly aware of everything. The rough texture of his sweatshirt against my cheek, the way his hair tickled my neck, the slow, even rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. He had crossed a line, but he had waited for me to meet him in the middle. He had offered the question, and I had provided the answer. He fell asleep like that, his body relaxing into mine, his breathing deepening into the familiar, steady rhythm I knew so well. I sat there for hours, long after the movie had ended and the screen had gone black, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid to break the spell. The blizzard outside howled, but in our small corner of the world, there was only a profound and terrifying peace. I was no longer just the harbor. He had docked his ship, and he was not leaving. When we returned to campus, the geography of our nights had been irrevocably altered. The floor was abandoned. The pretense was gone. The first night back, he came to my room, and without a word, I moved to one side of my bed. It was only a full, not a queen, a small vessel for two people. But he slid in beside me, under the covers, and turned on his side, his back to me. I lay on my own side, a rigid plank of anxiety, a gulf of a few inches between us that felt as wide as an ocean. But it was a start. We were sharing the same space, the same warmth, the same small island in the dark. The cuddling started a few nights after that. It was born, like everything else, from his unspoken need. He was having a nightmare, muttering and twitching in his sleep, his limbs flailing. He let out a soft, wounded sound, and on pure instinct, I rolled over and put a hand on his shoulder. "Leo," I whispered. "Hey, it's okay. You're okay." He didn't wake up, but the tension in his body seemed to dissolve under my touch. He shifted, turning toward me in his sleep, and before I could process what was happening, he had burrowed against my chest, his arm thrown over my waist, his face tucked into the curve of my neck. My body went from rigid to electrified. This was a proximity I had only ever dreamed of, a level of intimacy my mind had cordoned off with warning tape. His breath was warm against my skin. I could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart against my ribs, a counter-rhythm to my own frantic pulse. I should have moved him. I should have gently pushed him back to his side of the bed. That would have been the sensible thing to do, the self-preservative thing to do. But I couldn't. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. It felt like coming home. I carefully, tentatively, wrapped my own arm around him, holding him close. His body relaxed completely, melting into mine. He sighed, a soft, contented sound in his sleep, and snuggled closer. I lay there in the dark, holding my best friend, my heart a tangle of terror and incandescent joy. The line had not just been crossed, it had been erased. And I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and thrilling, that there was no going back. Our nights settled into this new, unbelievable rhythm. He would come into my room, we would get into my bed, and he would immediately turn and wrap himself around me, or pull me back against his chest, his arms a warm, heavy weight around me. We never spoke of it in the morning. In the harsh light of day, we were just Julian and Leo, best friends, teammates. We would walk to the dining hall together, sit with the team, talk about classes and practice. But beneath the surface of our ordinary interactions, this new, secret world hummed with a silent, electric current. It was a world that existed only in the dark, in the confines of my small room. It was a world of breathtaking, terrifying intimacy. I lived for the nights. The days became a long, drawn-out waiting period, a time to be endured until I could feel the solid, reassuring weight of him against me again. I was drowning, and he was the only thing keeping me afloat. Or maybe I was the anchor, and he was the one who was adrift. I was never quite sure. I began to study him with a new intensity. I watched for any sign, any flicker of acknowledgement in his eyes that he was aware of what we were doing. But he gave me nothing. He treated it with a kind of resolute normalcy, as if sleeping tangled up with his best friend every night was the most ordinary thing in the world. This plausible deniability was both my torment and my salvation. It allowed me to have this incredible closeness with him, but it also kept me in a state of perpetual uncertainty. Was this just about comfort for him? Was I just a warm body, a human security blanket he used to chase away his demons? Or was there something more? Was it possible that in reaching for comfort, he had stumbled into love? I would lie awake for hours, his arm draped over me, his head on my chest, and I would analyze every detail. The way his fingers would sometimes tighten their grip on my shirt in his sleep. the soft, unguarded expression on his face in the moments just before he drifted off. These were my clues, the fragments of data I tried to piece together into a coherent theory. But I was too close to the subject. My own longing was a distorting lens, and I couldn't trust my own observations. I was a scientist in love with his experiment, hopelessly biased and utterly lost. His presence was a physical imprint on my life. My room smelled faintly of him. My laundry was a mix of his clothes and mine. I knew the exact weight of his head on my shoulder, the shape of his hand in the small of my back. He was a constant, a given, and yet, the silence between us on the subject was deafening. It was a massive, invisible object in the room that we both meticulously navigated around. We could talk about anything. His resurgent confidence in the pool, my latest photography project, the inanity of campus politics. But we could not talk about the fact that we spent every night holding each other as if we were the only two people left in the world. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. It felt like living two separate lives in the same body. There was daylight Julian, Leo's best friend. And there was nighttime Julian, the man who held the object of his affection and adoration in his arms, living out a fantasy he never would have dared to imagine. I was terrified of which one was real, and even more terrified that one day I would be forced to choose. The breaking point, the moment the unspoken could no longer be contained, came on a night that started like any other. It was late spring, the semester winding down. The windows were open, and the scent of rain-soaked earth and blooming jasmine drifted into the room. Leo had been quieter than usual all day, a thoughtful, inward mood settling over him that was rare. When he came to my room that night, he didn't get into bed right away. He just stood by the window, looking out at the glistening campus grounds, his silhouette framed by the soft glow of the streetlights. "What are you thinking about?" I asked, my voice soft in the quiet room. He was silent for a long time, his back still to me. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands were clenched into loose fists at his sides. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and strained. "I don't know what this is, Julian." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and dangerous. He had finally acknowledged the invisible thing. He had given it a name, even if that name was just a question. My heart felt like it stopped. This was it. The moment of reckoning. The end of the beautiful, fragile illusion we had been living in. I was convinced he was about to say it was too weird, that he needed to stop, that he had figured himself out, and this wasn't it. I braced myself for the impact, for the devastating blow that would shatter me. "What do you mean?" I asked, my own voice a stranger's, thin and reedy. He turned from the window, and his face was a landscape of confusion and turmoil. The easy confidence he usually wore was gone, replaced by a raw, painful vulnerability that mirrored my own. "This," he said, gesturing vaguely at the bed, at the room, at the space between us. "Us. Sleeping here. I went to a party tonight. With the team." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure agitation. "My ex was there. Sarah. She tried to talk to me. She said she missed me, that maybe she made a mistake." A cold dread washed over me. This was it. He was going back to her. Of course he was. She was the normal, correct answer to his life's equation. I was just a temporary variable, a placeholder he used while he was solving for X. I steeled myself. I would be a good friend. I would tell him that was great, that he should do what makes him happy. I would help him pack his pillow and blanket. I would watch him walk out my door for the last time, and then I would fall apart in the silence he left behind. "And?" I prompted, my voice barely a whisper. "And I felt nothing," he said, his eyes wide with a kind of shocked discovery. "Absolutely nothing." I looked at her, and it was like looking at a stranger. All I could think about was, getting back here. He took a hesitant step toward me. I told myself it was just about not being alone. After the breakup, after the meet, I told myself you were just being a good friend. That this was just comfort. He let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "But it's not, is it? It's not just comfort." He was standing in front of me now, so close I could see the frantic pulse beating in his throat. His eyes were searching mine, desperate for an answer, for a map through the wilderness of his own feelings. He was lost, and for the first time, he was asking me for directions. All the fear, all the anxiety, all the carefully constructed walls I had built around my heart crumbled in that moment. All that was left was the raw, undeniable truth. "No," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "It's not." The space between us was electric, humming with years of unspoken words, with months of secret, nocturnal intimacy. He looked from my eyes to my mouth and back again. The air grew thick, heavy. I could feel the world narrowing down to this single point, this single moment of unbearable tension. "Julian," he breathed, his voice ragged. Would it be okay if I kissed you?" The question was a gift. It was a confession and a plea all at once. It was the ultimate act of vulnerability, laying his heart bare and giving me all the power. He wasn't taking. He was asking. And in that moment of pure, terrifying honesty, I felt a sense of peace so profound it almost brought me to my knees. The long, agonizing wait was over. The negative was finally being brought into the light. I didn't answer with words. I couldn't. I just closed the last remaining inch of distance between us and pressed my lips to his. It wasn't a passionate, movie-style kiss. It was hesitant. It was tender. It was a question and an answer, a beginning and an end. It was the taste of salt from tears I hadn't realized I was crying. The feeling of his hand coming up to gently cup my jaw, the solid, undeniable reality of him. It was the sound of two silent languages finally converging into a single, shared word. It was everything. When we finally broke apart, we just stood there, foreheads resting against each other, breathing the same air. The silence that returned was not the empty, uncertain silence of before. It was a new silence, a silence filled with peace, with understanding, with the quiet, breathtaking relief of being truly, completely seen. "Okay," he whispered against my lips, a soft, shaky exhale. "Yeah, okay." The aftermath should have been simple. It should have been the start of a beautiful, easy chapter. But the heart is a complicated, stubborn thing, especially a heart that has spent 21 years believing it was one thing, only to discover it might be something else entirely. The kiss had shattered the ambiguity, but in its place, a new and more terrifying landscape emerged, the landscape of consequence. For me, it was a release, a validation of a truth I had carried for years. For Leo, it was a cataclysm. It was an earthquake that shook the very foundations of his identity. He pulled away first, not just from the kiss, but from me. The next morning, he was gone before I woke up. First, I found a note on my desk, 3 words scrawled in his familiar, messy handwriting. "Need to think." The words were a punch to the gut. Thinking was dangerous. Thinking was what led to doubt, to fear, to retreat. Our entire relationship had been built on not thinking, on pure, instinctual feeling. By introducing thought, he was introducing poison. He avoided me. For 3 agonizing days, he was a ghost. I'd see him across the quad, and he would abruptly change direction. I'd see him in the dining hall, surrounded by the loud buffer of the team, and he would pointedly look anywhere but at me. The open door to my room remained open, a pathetic, hopeful invitation that went unanswered. The silence that had once been our sanctuary was now my prison. The quiet of my room was no longer peaceful. It was a hollow, aching void, filled with the phantom weight of him, the ghost of his warmth in my bed. My mind, my cruel, analytical mind, went into overdrive. I had misread everything. The kiss was a mistake, an anomaly, a moment of confused grief he now regretted. I was a fool. I had taken his vulnerability and projected my own desires onto it. I had destroyed the most important friendship of my life for a single, selfish moment. The pain was a physical thing, a cold, heavy stone in my stomach. The hope that had bloomed so brightly in my chest withered and died, leaving behind a bitter ash. On the 4th day, I couldn't take it anymore. The not knowing was worse than any possible rejection. I was a photographer. I lived in a world of blacks and whites, of clear images developed from murky negatives. This gray, blurry limbo was intolerable. I found him where I knew he would be, in the place he went when the world became too much, the pool. It was late, the natatorium officially closed, but as a team member, he had a key. The vast space was silent except for the gentle lapping of water against the sides of the pool and the low hum of the filtration system. The air was thick with the familiar smell of chlorine. He was just floating on his back in the middle of the deep end, his arms spread wide, his eyes closed. A perfect, still figure in the deep blue. He looked like one of my photographs, a moment of peace captured and held. "Leo," I said. My voice echoed in the cavernous space, unnaturally loud. His eyes flew open. For a second, he looked like a startled animal, ready to bolt. But he was trapped in the water, with nowhere to go. He slowly, deliberately, paddled to the side of the pool, his movements weary. He rested his arms on the edge, his chin on his forearms, looking up at me. His hair was slicked back, water dripping down his face, and in the harsh, overhead lights, he looked younger, more lost than I had ever seen him. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firmer now. I would not be the fragile one. Not now. "I know," he said, his voice a low murmur. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at the lane line floating a few feet away. "What happened, Leo?" I asked, keeping my tone even, betraying none of the howling desperation inside me. "What are you thinking?" He was silent for a long time, the only sound the soft sloshing of the water as he treaded. "I'm scared," he finally whispered, the words so quiet I could barely hear them. "Julian, I'm so scared. This isn't who I am." "Who you are?" I asked, a bitter edge creeping into my voice despite my best efforts. "The guy who won all the medals? The guy who dated the popular girl? Is that a rule book? Is there a chapter in there that says you can't what? Feel something for me?" "It's not that simple," he shot back, his head snapping up, his eyes finally meeting mine. They were filled with a desperate, pleading frustration. "My whole life, it's been a straight line. Swim, win, get a girlfriend, get a job. It's all laid out. This," he gestured between us, "this isn't on the map. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know what it means." "What did it feel like?" I asked, my voice softening. "When you kissed me, what did it feel like?" He looked away again, a flush creeping up his neck. "It felt right," he admitted, the words sounding like it was being physically pulled from his chest. "It felt more right than anything has in a long time. That's what's scaring me. It shouldn't have felt right, but it did." I sank to my knees on the cool, tiled deck, bringing myself down to his level. "Leo, look at me." He hesitated, then slowly turned his gaze back to mine. "Forget the map. Forget the rulebook. Forget who you think you're supposed to be. For the last few months, you have done nothing but what you felt. You came to my room because you felt like you needed to. You slept in my bed because you felt safe. You kissed me because you felt like you had to. Why are you starting to think now? Your feelings have been a better guide than your thoughts ever were." Tears welled in his eyes, mingling with the chlorinated water on his face. "But what if I'm wrong? What if I'm just confused? What if I hurt you? I can't. Julian, I can't lose you. You're everything. If this goes wrong, I lose everything." And there it was, the heart of his fear. It wasn't about labels or what other people would think. It was about us. It was the same fear I had lived with for years, the terror of risking the one relationship that mattered more than anything. His fear was a perfect mirror of my own. "You're going to lose me this way," I said, my voice raw with a pain that was suddenly, shockingly shared. "You're losing me right now, by hiding. This silence, this avoidance, it's 1,000 times more painful than any rejection. If you want to walk away, then walk away. But do it to my face. Tell me the kiss was a mistake, and you want to go back to how things were. But don't you dare hide from me. Don't treat me like a stranger. I have earned more than that from you." A tear finally escaped, tracing a clean path through the water on his cheek. He shook his head, a slow, miserable motion. "I can't go back," he whispered. "I don't want to, but I don't know how to go forward." "Then let me show you," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and placed it on his wet head, my fingers tangling in his hair. He leaned into my touch instantly, instinctively, a flower turning toward the sun. He closed his eyes, a shudder running through his body. We go forward the same way we got here. One step at a time. No maps. No rules. Just this. He didn't say anything. He just stayed there, leaning into my hand, letting me be his anchor in the turbulent water. I could feel the fight draining out of him, replaced by a weary, fragile surrender. The confrontation was over. The conflict was not resolved, not entirely, but a truce had been called. We stayed like that for a long time, in the quiet, sterile cathedral of the swimming pool, the air thick with the ghosts of his past, and the terrifying, beautiful promise of our future. I didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in days, the cold stone of dread in my stomach began to dissolve, replaced by a tiny, flickering flame of hope. He didn't know how to go forward, but he didn't want to go back. That was enough. The journey forward was not a straight line. It was a slow, meandering path, with switchbacks and stumbles. Leo didn't move back into my bed immediately. The first night after our talk at the pool, he slept on my couch again, a deliberate, symbolic step back. It wasn't a retreat to the old days, but a recalibration. It was his way of saying, "I'm here, I'm not running, but I need to go slow." I understood. I gave him the space he needed, the quiet reassurance of my presence without the overwhelming intimacy of my touch. We talked. For the first time, we talked about us. We talked late into the night, our voices low, hesitant threads weaving a new kind of tapestry in the dark. He talked about his confusion, his fear of disappointing his family, his struggle to reconcile this new, unexpected part of himself with the person he'd always been. I talked about my own years of silence, my fear of losing his friendship, the quiet ache of loving him from a distance. It was like lancing a wound. It was painful and messy, but it was the only way to let the healing begin. We were two cartographers, finally comparing notes, our two separate maps of the same territory slowly merging into one. After a few nights on the couch, he pointed to the empty side of my bed. "Is that spot? Is it still open?" he asked, his voice quiet, almost shy. It was the first time he had ever asked. The first time it was a conscious, verbal choice. "Always," I said, and my heart felt like it might burst. When he got into bed that night, it was different. He lay on his back, and I lay on mine, a respectable distance between us. But then, in the darkness, I felt his hands searching for mine across the sheets. I met him halfway, our fingers lacing together. It was a simple, profound gesture. It wasn't the desperate, comforting clutch of sleep. It was a conscious, deliberate connection. A choice. We fell asleep like that, holding hands, two separate people choosing to be tethered together in the dark. Slowly, cautiously, we rebuilt our intimacy on this new foundation of honesty. The cuddling returned, but it was different now. It was no longer something that just happened to us in the ambiguity of sleep. It was something we chose. He would pull me against him and whisper my name, a quiet confirmation. I would rest my head on his chest and feel his hand stroking my hair, a deliberate act of tenderness. The kisses were infrequent at first, soft and questioning, each one a reassurance. They were apologies for his fear and promises of his intent. We were learning a new language, or rather, we were learning to speak our old, silent language out loud. The world outside my room began to filter in, and we had to decide how to face it. The first test came when a teammate made a casual joke about us spending all our time together. In the past, Leo would have laughed it off with a boisterous, deflecting comment. This time, he just smiled a small, quiet smile and put his arm around my shoulders, pulling me into a brief side hug. "He's my best friend," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument or mockery. It was a small act, but it was a public declaration of my importance to him, a shield against the world's casual scrutiny. He was choosing me, not just in the privacy of my room, but in the light of day. We never had a big coming-out moment. It wasn't Leo's style or mine. Our relationship unfolded organically, quietly revealing itself to the people who mattered. We told my parents when we went to visit for the summer. We sat on the same porch where he had once charmed them, and this time, we sat holding hands. Leo, in his straightforward, earnest way, simply told them, "I love Julian, and we're together, My mom just smiled, a knowing, gentle smile. "We've known you loved him for a long time, Leo," she said. "We were just waiting for you to figure it out." He looked at me, his eyes wide with surprise, and I just shrugged, a small smile playing on my lips. It seemed my silent language was not as silent as I had thought. Our life together found its own rhythm, a peaceful, steady cadence. It was built on the foundation of our friendship, but fortified with the gentle strength of this new, acknowledged love. It was in the quiet moments that I felt it most profoundly. Making coffee together in the morning, moving around each other in the small kitchen in a familiar, easy dance. Me sitting on the floor of our first apartment, sorting through my negatives, and him sitting on the couch, reading, his foot resting on my back, a casual, constant touch. It was in the way he still smelled of chlorine when he came home from his new coaching job at a local high school, and the way I still looked at him like he was a piece of art I was seeing for the first time. It was in the way we could sit in a room together for hours, in complete silence, and feel not a shred of loneliness, only a deep and abiding peace. One evening, a year or so after we had graduated and moved in together, I was developing photos in the small darkroom I had built in our spare bathroom. The red safe light cast a warm, otherworldly glow on everything. Leo came to the door, a silhouette in the frame. "Hey," he said softly, his voice respectful of the delicate work I was doing. "Dinner's ready." "Almost done," I said, carefully agitating a tray of developer, watching an image of him, a recent one, laughing on a beach, slowly emerge on the paper, like a memory surfacing. He didn't leave. He just leaned against the doorframe, watching me. In the dim, red light, his face was soft, unguarded. It was the same face I had seen in the gloom of my dorm room, the same face I had watched sleep for countless nights. But the confusion was gone. The fear was gone. In its place was a quiet certainty, a calm that seemed to radiate from him. "What is it?" I asked, smiling. "Nothing," he said, his own smile evident in his voice. I like watching you. You have this focus. It's the same look you had when you were editing my terrible essays." He paused, and then added, his voice softer. "It's the same look you had that night at the pool." I stopped what I was doing and looked at him, really looked at him. He was no longer the unknowing initiator, the boy stumbling toward a feeling he couldn't name. He was a man who knew his own heart. And I was no longer the quiet observer, the boy hiding behind his camera and his silence. I was a man who had been brave enough to be seen. We began in silence and confusion, in a language of gestures and guesswork, of open doors and shared blankets. We were two people trying to heal from different wounds in the same quiet space. He was searching for an anchor in a storm, and I was a lighthouse keeper who had fallen in love with a single, specific ship. But the thing about healing is that it changes you. The anchor learns it can sail, and the lighthouse keeper learns he can leave the shore. We didn't just fix each other. We grew into something new, together. The final photograph isn't just about a moment captured in time. It's about the entire process, the darkness, the chemicals, the patience, the slow emergence of a clear and honest image. Our love was like that. It developed slowly, in the dark, until it was finally ready to be brought into the light, beautiful and true and whole. And we began to live in the beautiful, honest world we'd learned to create together.